What is up, folks? Casual Dad here, and please excuse the occasional sniffle or sneeze. Like every other dad, since it is back to school season, I have a cold. Tis the season for Nurgle's blessing. But yeah, today, in honor of the current campaign, the Plasma Charge campaign, we're going to go ahead and talk about everyone's favorite space skeletons, your Necrons. Bloop. And we're going to go ahead and start by talking about my absolute favorite of the Necron Warlords, and that is Ulthakar. And that actually conveniently gives you the special rule right here. And that's just when an enemy card is injured below a certain threshold, if they've taken 25% or more damage, the Necron card opposite, so your card, gains Hardwired, boosting their attack stats by 15. Now that's both ranged and melee. It's important to highlight here that Necrons don't have any Psychic, so you're only going to get those two stats, but it will boost either one equally. And the thing about it too, one thing that I always really like about it, is it's not dependent on your board state. Doesn't matter what cards you have. It's not like any of the Space Marine Warlords where they get a buff based on if they were on the board before or if a friendly has gotten the kill bonus for Helbrecht, for example. So if you lose a card, then you immediately play a new card, and the opposite card is damaged, the new card you play will also get that bonus. So the 15 flat is somewhat low, but it's one of those things where it's very consistent, happens basically all the time, applies to any card, so it actually makes a pretty significant difference during the game. It's also important to note that it does stack. So if you have Furious Charge, if you have Inspire, if you have Enrage, Berserk, that's the one, it will stack with all of those. So we're going to go ahead and jump in a game here while I'm talking. But yeah, so it's one of those things that's a little bit misleading where it is flat rather than percent, which makes it better on cheaper, weaker cards and less impactful on bigger, more expensive cards. But 15 is still pretty significant. Even if you get a Nightbringer with a bonus 15 damage, that can swing a game. So it's nice to have. Just some general notes about Necrons here. They don't have any... They have one poison now, but they have 0 psychers. They have very limited traits, pretty much across the board. They just don't have that many traits available at all. What they do have, though, is a whole lot of a couple. They've got a bunch of fear, they've got a ton of regen, a whole lot of Medicae, and then a bunch of Berserk. All of which kind of goes with the different playstyles that they can offer. You do see some Barrage at the high upper end and a handful elsewhere too, but really it kind of leans on their kind of core stats, or their core traits rather. And one of the things about them is that they trade that lack of flexibility as a faction for it's a relatively shallow card pool. They don't have that many cards to choose from, but they have such a strong showing of specific traits that they end up with a lot of options to choose from, which is pretty significant. So I really kind of enjoy playing Necrons. They were actually one of the first factions that I got into successfully. They were one of the ones I first laddered with successfully, and I've since played them a lot less, but it still is, near and dear to my heart. Right here, I took a minute to charge up some of these, so I wanted to go ahead and demonstrate. I've got 2 cards that have Berserk, Hardwired, so they get the bonus from Ulthakar, and then also have the added bonus of you take damage every time you deal damage in this campaign. So these guys end up putting out absurd damage for the points. That's an 18-point card dealing 111 damage because of the combination of effects. Oh look, there's Inspire, of course. So these will easily... I mean, this guy's going to die making the attack because it takes the damage back, but like, look at that. That is crazy. And that's a little bit special, again, because of the event modifier is giving them extra stacks of that. But you combine Berserk with Ulthakar's trait, which is kind of what he's written to do because he is the Berserk Scorpec Destroyer Lord. It's a very, very powerful combo. And a couple notes about him is he's particularly good on your cheaper cards that have low attack stats. So like this guy goes from 11 and 33 to 26 and 48, that's with Inspire, but if I deal some damage to something, it makes a difference real fast. And another thing I always like to bring up with Ulthakar, it doesn't apply in this because I'm trying to get the bonus card and just play to this campaign, but he does very, very well with about half full decks with really beefy cards, and particularly with Barrage and Furious Charge, both because the Furious Charge will get the bonus damage, but also if you land a Furious Charge when you hit the board, you can then trigger the bonus for your follow-up attack. So you play a card on your turn, does Furious Charge, nicks 25% off the health of the opposing card, and then boom, you get a flat bonus to your attack stats for your attack back. It's pretty great. Gives you surprising burst, there it is right there, gives you that surprising burst damage on very cheap cards. So you think about the Necron's Endless cards. They've got cards like your, those are the base Necron Warriors, there's the Scarabs, just the plain old-fashioned Scarab Beetles, and then the big, beefy, the free card right now, that big, beefy melee Endless is really good with that trait because that has high health and Endless, so it's balanced by having a fairly weak attack. It only has a melee attack and it's fairly weak, so if you had a flat 15 on top of that, it makes a big difference real quick. Good, let's see if you can do it, buddy. That was probably a mistake, but we'll see if it bites me in the butt. One thing I also like about Ulthakar is his own stats. So he, of course, has the Hardwired, same ability that you get otherwise. And then he also has Berserk, which combos beautifully with his own ability. And he has decent stats. He's clearly meant to be a melee hitter, but he also has a pretty significant ranged attack as well. And then we'll see him boost up here. And of course, with this modifier, he gets pretty crazy. But he's got decent hit points, very aggressive attack stats, and builds up power fairly quickly throughout the course of a game. He still struggles a little bit at upper level play himself, just because he doesn't have shields, he doesn't have fear, he doesn't have any defensive tech, he's all about offense. So he himself is not a card you want on the board to duke it out with a lot of the kind of endgame warlords out there. It's not really what he's for. He can finish off the squishier warlords, clear a couple cards to get to a warlord on the opposing side, and then have your bodyguards finish it off. But he himself is very risky to put on the board, especially that 44 price point. Coming in at 44 points makes him vulnerable to big game hunter, and even at max, his stats are just okay for that cost. You really take him for the utility of his ability. He can take a couple hits in the end game from most warlords, so he's not a total slouch, but he's still not going to hang with like a Gaz or Abaddon or the Swarm Lord. But he's still, you know, he'll certainly take down a oh shoot, what's his name? The Imperial Guard squishies. Whatever they are, I don't remember the names. But he'll certainly stand his own against quite a few of the warlords out there. Does not like Artemis, Big Game Hunter, or Target Acquired. Just avoid all of those. But quite good for what he does. And as I mentioned a little bit before, just to touch on it again, he's a very good beginning warlord because of what he can offer to lower cost cards. Just to look at that real quick, so we're talking about Scarab Beetles, 4 points for 28 damage. Bump that to, what is it, 42? 43, excuse me. 43 damage with 2 lives. It's not going to do you great against Badruk, but that's still a lot of damage for a 4-point card. That's going to really surprise some opponents and be able to do a significant chunk of damage that you wouldn't otherwise be able to do. Likewise, this guy, 25 goes up to 40. No joke there. And it, again, is endless, so it goes up to 40, and then we'll still have 40 on the following life. And that is a total of 9 points in your deck. Top off again with this Fear guy. Has middling attack stats because he has a very low cost point and fear, but combine this with Ulthakar, this guy can hold down a lane surprisingly well and also dish out real meaningful damage while he's at it. So those cards benefit hugely from Ulthakar's stat. And then the other one, of course, I mentioned is this guy right here, is the current free card. 55 is pretty significant for an endless card that has that many hit points and even has the melee debuff to kind of alternate turns if you don't want to hit directly every time. But for me personally, my most successful builds with Ulthakar have been smaller and they build around the Sun Eater. Very high damage, has both melee and ranged, has regen if you get high enough there, and then also has barrage. So you pop this guy on the left end or in the middle, and he's triggering Ulthakar's advanced attack trait for cards in the wings fairly easily. So you're doing a lot of bonus damage on your right flank, and he himself is very aggressive and very good at triggering the thing himself. So you get small barrage on the left, Sun Eater in the middle, something on the right that hits single target direct damage, and that last card, so first triggers, hits the card across from Emberesh and gives him the plus 15 base stat boost. And I mean, he's already got 105, but still, 15's not nothing. And then he triggers the hardwired extra bonus attack damage to the card on the very right, and then all of a sudden you have this terrifying wave that can repeat multiple times until they die. Another key one I mentioned, he does struggle a little bit with durability. Again, he has no tech himself or in the deck for extra defense. Luckily, Necrons have very high stats. So 2 other really good cards for him are going to be, of course, your Azagorod, coming in with Fear and Furious Charge, both of which, again, benefit very well from the boosted damage, and then also Furious Charge being able to trigger his own damage buff from that hardwired. Also got a really big chunk of stats, so he'll stick around and really earn that, or really make up for that too. Necrons also have quite a few shielded cards, which have the advantage of being able to trigger that hardwired while taking less damage back themselves. So on defense or offense, the shields can trigger to really kind of help get the most out of the ability while also not giving up cards too quickly, which can be a danger with Ulthakar. This guy is one of my favorite pieces in there too. I do think ranged is generally better, but with Ulthakar it just feels very appropriate to run melee, and this guy is a great example of someone who does well in those decks. Being very aggressive, having that ready in addition to that Furious Charge. He's an excellent piece to throw in an Ulthakar deck, even if it's mostly ranged. He still can be your melee backup. That is going to be it for our talk about Ulthakar. I also talked about how much access Necrons have to Medicae. They've got some really good Medicae cards in the medium cost range, these two right here. Of course, Oricon being a little bit less common because he's epic, but this guy should come up quite a bit. And then I believe there are several others. There's the Tomb Spider. That's 3 right there that can slot into most decks. They all have a melee attack that sucks, and they also have ranged attacks that aren't great either, but they would benefit from Hardwired themselves as well. So you take any of these cards that have really good traits and a lot of hit points that don't hit very hard, suddenly they do hit hard because of Ulthakar. So he's often overlooked, not a lot of people's favorite, but I really enjoy him. There's a lot of nostalgia there because he was my favorite when I started out, and he just has a lot of, he's got a lot to offer. So that's it. That's my rundown on Ulthakar. Look for some rundowns on the others in the next few days. I'm going to go ahead and run through Necrons and just finish it out while we're talking about it. So good luck. Let me know if you have any requests.